It's very simple. Prime Minister Carney in Canada caved to President Trump in the United States of America. And President Trump knows how to negotiate.
You have 11 out of your 13 provinces who ban American products on their shelf.
The negotiations have restarted. We're going to focus on getting the best deal for Canadians. We're making progress. There's more to do.
The Prime Minister probably could find a way to get Parliament to do its will.
Is whether or not Carney will make other concessions to the U.S.
What if Canada didn't cave, but trapped Trump instead? Mark Carney quietly killed a billion-dollar tax, and suddenly Trump was back at the table, desperate to deal. Was it weakness or a silent checkmate? The world saw surrender, but behind the scenes, Carney flipped the script, and this time, it's Trump caught in the game.
The U.S. president was voicing his displeasure with Canada's digital services tax, which would have seen tech giants like Google and Amazon shell out around $2 billion to the Canadian economy beginning tomorrow. The federal Liberals have dropped that tax after a phone call between Trump and Prime Minister Mark Carney over the weekend.
The negotiations have restarted. We're going to focus on getting the best deal for Canadians. We're making progress. There's more to do.
It's very simple. Prime Minister Carney in Canada caved to President Trump in the United States of America. And President Trump knows how to negotiate.
Let's be crystal clear, Donald Trump's outrage wasn't about principle. It wasn't about fairness. It was about power and, more importantly, protecting the billion-dollar American tech companies that fill his campaign coffers: Google, Amazon, Facebook. These corporate giants would have been the ones paying the digital services tax, not average Americans. Mark Carney wasn't going after America. He was going after the elite who profit from Canadian users but pay zero back into the Canadian system. This tax was designed to make them pay their fair share, and Trump couldn't tolerate that, not because it hurt American families, but because it hurt his donor class. What did Carney do? He played a move that looked like a retreat, but was actually a masterstroke. He paused the tax, not canceled it forever, only after securing a direct call with Trump and restarting negotiations. Carney threw a piece off the board to set up a checkmate. And the entire world missed it except the Canadians who understand strategy.
The president indicated in his message last week, Friday, he talked about tariffs. Our Treasury Secretary indicated that there would have been a beginning of a 301 investigation into the unfair nature of the digital services tax that would have been initiated most likely today. Neither one of those things is going to happen.
So what was the U.S. planning in response? A brutal retaliation, not just the typical Trump Twitter tantrum, but a full-blown trade war tool, the 301 investigation. That's the same legal weapon the U.S. used to crush China with tariffs. Trump wanted to label Canada's tax unfair so he could legally slap Canada with crushing penalties. But Carney saw it coming. He anticipated this red line, waited until the threat was fully formed, and then disarmed it, not by backing down, but by pulling the rug out from under Trump's planned attack. The moment Canada paused the tax, Trump's entire justification for war evaporated. No tax, no investigation. That's not surrender. That's disarming your opponent before the first bullet is fired. And while Trump now had no ammunition, Carney had the world watching. He flipped the headlines from "Canada challenges America" to "Canada cooperates," all while holding a silent ace up his sleeve. That's how grown-ups win negotiations. That's how leaders think in decades, not in tweets.
They were planning on getting rid of this tax altogether all along. I think it's something trade watchers have been thinking about for a while and seeing for a while. We just expected that capitulation would come down in the context of a renegotiation or review of the Canada-US-Mexico agreement. But here we have it simply to get us back to the table, right? To get us back to what I would call the poker table.
This wasn't a collapse. It was a calculated move in a long game. Mark Carney never saw the DST as permanent from the beginning. It was a pressure tool, a card in his hand meant to provoke reaction. And provoke it did. Trump took the bait, lost his cool, and then walked right into the poker table where Carney had already stacked the chips. Some commentators mistakenly called it capitulation, but they ignored the timing, the precision, and the bigger picture. Carney didn't fold. He placed a bet, forced Trump to match it. And now Canada is negotiating from a position of visibility and goodwill, while Trump is left defending billionaires against a tax most Canadians supported. Carney didn't lose the game. He started it on his terms, and he did it by removing the tax at the moment it created the most leverage. That's not weakness, that's genius.
They just slapped a brand new tax on us that we've told them for months is an unfair tax. Oh, by the way, you have 11 out of your 13 provinces who ban American products on their shelves. We haven't banned a single Canadian product in the United States. That's a pretty nasty move.
Let's unpack the word nasty. This word didn't come from a policy expert or a trade economist. It came from a president defending billion-dollar tech monopolies against a small, fair Canadian tax. Trump wasn't angry because a farmer in Iowa was suffering. He wasn't upset because a family business in Michigan was being taxed. He exploded because Amazon and Google, the same companies that back his campaigns, were finally being asked to pay Canada what they owed. Trump calls that nasty. But what's truly nasty is using presidential power to protect the super rich while average Americans continue paying higher prices due to the very tariffs he proudly champions. Canada banned some American goods in retaliation to Trump's tariffs. That's called self-defense, not nastiness. If Canada is nasty for protecting itself, then Trump must be a saint for forcing families to pay more for groceries just to look tough on trade. But here's the twist: Canadians saw through it, and so did Carney.
Canadians elected Mark Carney because they thought he was the guy to get his elbows up and to stand up to Donald Trump over his tariffs. This could become a real political problem for the Prime Minister if Canadians agree with the White House, Erica, and that he actually did cave to Donald Trump over imposing this tax.
This is exactly how misinformation spreads when headlines focus on the surface, not the substance. Yes, Canadians expected Carney to challenge Trump, and that's exactly what he did. But Carney's method wasn't screaming at podiums or throwing tantrums on social media. He used strategy. He made one temporary move, pausing the digital services tax, and in return, he forced Trump to reopen trade talks that had been slammed shut. That's not caving. That's calling Trump's bluff. Those accusing Carney of weakness are playing checkers while he's playing chess. Every move was planned. He pulled the DST knowing it would ignite this very reaction, a public outcry that would force attention on Trump's hypocrisy. If this was political suicide, Carney wouldn't have gained momentum, but he did. Why? Because Canadians realized something deeper. Real strength isn't in confrontation. It's in control. Carney showed he could stand tall without shouting, and that shook Trump more than any loud protest ever could.
And so it does seem like an extremely high price to pay just to get back to this table without any certainty that a deal is coming or that it's going to be a particularly appetizing deal for Canada.
This argument sounds valid until you look closer. What did Canada really give up? A tax that wasn't even active yet, a tax that could be reintroduced at any time. In exchange, Carney reopened a direct trade line with the most unpredictable president in modern history. Let's not forget, Trump had walked away completely. He wasn't negotiating, he was dictating. Carney flipped the board. He removed the digital services tax temporarily, not permanently. That's not a price, that's bait. And Trump took it. Now, trade teams are back at work. Dialogue has resumed, and the threat of a 301 investigation has been defused. Even if this deal ends without massive gains, Canada has already won in one critical way. It proved that it won't be bullied. Carney didn't fold. He repositioned. He gave nothing of substance, but gained everything in perception. To call that a high price is to miss the genius behind the move. The real price would have been letting Trump dictate terms. While Canadians watched in silence, Carney made sure that never happened.
We're giving quite a bit, and I've seen no evidence that it's had any effect, right, on the negotiations so far. So I'm a little worried about that question you asked, is what else do we have to give?
This is the part of the story that most headlines ignore. Canada has already sacrificed a lot. Since Trump returned to power, Canada has quietly approved billions in spending on border security, opened access for U.S. investments in critical minerals, and proposed participation in questionable missile defense projects. These aren't just numbers on paper. These are major shifts in policy designed to satisfy an unpredictable neighbor. Yet Trump continues demanding more. It's a one-way street. But even with all these quiet concessions, Mark Carney hasn't lost focus. His priority has never been to impress Trump. It has always been to protect Canadian jobs and long-term economic security. By strategically timing the digital services tax pullback, Carney forced media and public attention on what's really happening. One side is negotiating in good faith. The other is playing dirty. He used the pause not as surrender, but as spotlight. And now the entire world is watching Trump squirm while defending tech billionaires instead of focusing on what he owes Canada in return. That's how patient leaders win. They give ground not to retreat, but to set up their next advance.
He's going to have a big fight domestically, particularly with Quebec, whose dairy farmers tend to benefit the most from supply management, Erica.
This one sentence holds the weight of a political bombshell. Trump keeps pushing Canada to sacrifice its dairy protections, falsely accusing Canada of applying 400% duties on American dairy. That's a lie, but it plays well with Trump's political base. Carney, however, is standing on a minefield. If he touches Canada's supply management system, especially with Quebec in the picture, it could collapse his support. Yet he's navigating this pressure with incredible care. He hasn't promised Trump a thing on dairy. He hasn't signaled any sellout. What he's doing is delaying and deflecting while working every angle to protect Canada's most vulnerable sectors. And that's the hallmark of strategic governance. Most leaders would panic under the weight of Trump's bullying. But Carney is holding firm, even when it risks political backlash at home. That's not weakness, that's sacrifice. He's willing to take heat now to protect Canadian farmers for decades. He's betting on the intelligence of Canadians to see through the noise. And if they do, they'll realize Carney isn't playing for applause, he's playing for results.
The Prime Minister probably could find a way to get Parliament to do its will, just like the President today and over the weekend has been working with Congress to try to pass the big, beautiful bill.
This is where the game gets clever. Trump assumes Carney can twist Parliament's arm just like he bullies Congress into submission. But Canada is not America. Carney respects democratic process. And that's why his every move is calculated. He hasn't overstepped, and he hasn't made false promises. Instead, he's keeping his options open by showing restraint. Carney is creating a position of strength. If trade talks lead to serious wins like tariff relief or greater market access, he'll then take the proposal back to Parliament with real proof that the compromise was worth it. If the deal stinks, he walks away with dignity, blaming Trump for the failure. Either way, Carney wins the long game. He's not rushing. He's building a case step by step, inch by inch. Where Trump uses chaos, Carney uses patience, and this patience is already paying off because Canada hasn't lost anything permanent yet, but it's gaining leverage every day. That's not just political leadership, that's chess master diplomacy.
They have to live with what the president said. If they want to spend Canada Day focused on what the president said over the weekend, they can do that. The forecast is we're going to have a great day. You've got Diane and I are finding out. You've got all kinds of celebrations and events that are planned. You're going to have fireworks. I think there's a whole lot of better things to be spending tomorrow on. To be spending on Canada Day than, thinking about what the president said over the weekend.
This is how Donald Trump operates, throwing insults, mocking sovereignty, and hoping the target takes the bait. But Mark Carney didn't bite. While Trump joked again about Canada being America's 51st state, Carney didn't reply with anger or outrage. He responded with silence, calm, and quiet confidence. Because Carney understands something Trump never will. Strength doesn't always need to shout. The president's remarks were meant to provoke, to make Carney react emotionally, to shift the spotlight away from trade and toward sensationalism. But Carney stayed focused. Instead of letting the drama steal attention, he let the fireworks go off on Canada Day while trade negotiators kept working in the background. That's soft power. That's leadership. The world saw Trump act like a bully and Carney act like a statesman. And in the end, Canadians celebrated not only their independence, but their resilience. When your opponent insults your country and your answer is dignity, you've already won.
Well, those talks are going to continue. Both sides are working towards this July 21st deadline that they had set, kind of an arbitrary deadline. But one really important thing to watch, I think, is whether or not Carney will make other concessions to the U.S.
Every political player has eyes on what comes next. Will Carney give away more? Will he bend again? But here's the twist, he hasn't truly given anything yet. The digital services tax wasn't in effect. It was a symbolic threat, and when he pulled it, he gained global attention, re-engaged Trump, and still kept all other cards close to his chest. No concessions on dairy, no retreat on mineral controls, no silence on tariffs. All options remain open, but none have been handed away. The worry that Carney might concede, more is built on the assumption that he's playing defense. But he isn't. He's controlling the pace. He's letting Trump think he's winning while slowly guiding the game toward Canadian interests. That's the art of diplomacy, not just resisting pressure, but redirecting it. Critics worry about future concessions, but in truth, Carney has made Trump spend political capital to achieve what? A pause, not a win, just a pause. And when the final deal arrives, it'll be Carney who shaped the terms, not because he was loud, but because he was precise.
Now, if we got rid of the digital services tax for zero tariffs, that might be something to be, cautiously optimistic about, but we simply don't know.
Let's pause here. This line says it all. What if Canada actually pulled the tax and, in return, got rid of U.S. tariffs on Canadian goods? That would be a historic win, one where Canada traded a future tax for immediate relief, lower prices, more exports, more jobs. That's the dream scenario. And while it's not guaranteed, the fact that this is even on the table proves Carney's strategy is working. He took a risk and moved first, not recklessly, but with a goal in mind: economic relief for Canadians. Trump's unpredictability gave Carney a chance to surprise him with rationality. Instead of fighting fire with fire, Carney cooled the air and opened space for progress. The result? A possible tariff rollback and a clear diplomatic win. And if the tariffs don't come off, Carney can reintroduce the tax instantly, and this time with global support behind him. Either way, Carney holds the advantage. Trump wanted surrender. What he got was strategy. And while Americans cheer over a temporary pause, Canadians will see the real story. Their leader just outplayed the most unpredictable president in modern memory without raising his voice once.